For 32 years, I was the quiet architecture of the Vance family name. I poured my youth, my private inheritance, and my silence into building an empire, only to be slowly erased by the very children I carried. They relegated me to a drafty guest room, treating me like an embarrassing relic of their past, unaware that the foundation they stand on is entirely mine to collapse. If you have ever felt invisible to the people you sacrificed everything to protect, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Because sometimes, the only way to make them see you is to let everything they love slip through their fingers. How far would you let your own children push you before you finally decided to let them fall? The Blue Willow teacup has a tiny hairline fracture running from the rim down to the base of the handle. I trace it with my thumb, feeling the slight, sharp catch of the glaze. It is an old cup, the last of a set my grandmother gave me when Arthur and I were married in a drafty community church 49 years ago. "Mother, you're doing that thing again," Julian says. He doesn't look up from his tablet. He is 46 now, his hair salted with gray at the temples, wearing a suit that costs more than my father made in a year at the assembly plant. He sits at the head of the mahogany dining table, the table I polished every Sunday for 3 decades, back when this house belonged to me in more than just name. "What thing is that, Julian?" I ask quietly. Tracing the porcelain, it makes a scratching sound. It's distracting. He swipes a finger across his screen, his brow furrowed. Victoria and I were looking at the quarterly projections for the logistics division. We need to make some cuts. The overhead on the old warehouse district is eating into our margins. "Those warehouses are paid for, Julian," I say, setting the cup down on its saucer with a soft clink. "Your father and I bought the land in '86. There is no debt on them." "It's not about debt, Mother. It's about opportunity cost," Julian sighs, his voice carrying that heavy, patronizing patience he reserves for board members he wants to retire, and me. "But I don't expect you to worry about corporate tax structures. Just leave the business decisions to me." My daughter-in-law, Victoria, glides into the dining room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She doesn't look at me as she sets a stack of mail on the sideboard. "Julian, the decorator is coming at 2. I want to look at the fabric samples for the morning room. That old floral wallpaper has to go. It smells like, well, like old paper." The morning room is where I sit to read. The wallpaper was chosen by Arthur and me the year we finally paid off the mortgage. It is a soft, faded damask that catches the early light. "Do whatever you want with the room, Victoria," Julian murmurs, still typing. "Just keep it within the budget." Neither of them asks if I mind. They moved into the estate 2 years ago, shortly after Arthur's funeral, under the guise of keeping an eye on me. First, they took the master suite, because Victoria said my knees shouldn't have to climb the stairs. Then they moved my desk out of the study to make room for Julian's home office. Now, I sleep in the small guest room on the main floor, the one that overlooks the gravel driveway. The front door heavy clicks open, and Claire's voice drifts down the hallway, loud and hurried. She enters the dining room, her trench coat damp from the autumn drizzle, followed by her 19-year-old daughter, Chloe. "Tell me there's coffee," Claire says, dropping her designer bag onto my polished sideboard with a dull thud. She doesn't greet me, but she reaches over and takes my Blue Willow cup, taking a sip before grimacing. "Ugh, it's lukewarm. Mom, is there a fresh pot?" "I can make one, Claire," I say, starting to push myself up from the chair. My right hip grumbles, a dull, aching heat that has lived in my joints since the winter Arthur got sick. "Never mind, I'll just have Chloe do it," Claire says, waving a hand dismissively as she sits. "Chloe, go put a pot in the machine." Chloe doesn't move. She is staring at her phone, her thumb moving in rapid, rhythmic flicks. "In a minute, Mom. I'm texting Liam." "Chloe, now please," Claire snaps, though there is no real authority in her voice. She turns her attention to Julian. Julian, did you talk to the trustee about my monthly distribution? The car payment went through twice by mistake, and my account is flagged. I told you, Claire, the trust is tied up in the refinancing of the North Side terminal, Julian says, his voice tightening. You'll have to wait until the 15th. I can't wait until the 15th, Claire says, her face flushing. I have Chloe's tuition deposit due on Friday. Mom, do you have any of those old treasury bonds left in the safe? The ones Dad said were for the grandchildren? I look at my daughter. She has Arthur's blue eyes, but none of his stillness. She lives in a constant state of shallow panic, running from one self-inflicted financial crisis to the next, always assuming there is a safety net beneath her. Those bonds were liquidated 3 years ago, Claire, I say softly, to pay off the back taxes on your townhouse. Claire's eyes dart away, her mouth setting into a thin, hard line. You don't have to bring that up in front of everyone, Mom. It was a loan. A loan you never repaid, Julian points out, not out of defense for me, but to establish his dominance. Which is why I am the sole trustee of the estate now. If Dad had left it to both of us, you'd have sold your share to a developer by now. Both of you seem to forget, I say, my voice barely louder than a whisper, that the estate was built on the land my father left me. An uncomfortable silence falls over the room, the kind of silence that happens when a servant speaks out of turn. Victoria looks at her manicured nails. Julian slowly lowers his tablet. Mother, Julian says, his voice dropping into a low warning register. We've had this discussion. That was 40 years ago. The business is a completely different entity now. The nominal value of that land was pennies compared to the capital we've poured into it. Let's not romanticize the past. It's just that we're trying to run a multi-million-dollar corporation, Mom, Claire adds, her tone dripping with a soft, patronizing pity. You don't see the big picture. It's different now. Chloe finally looks up from her phone, her expression bored. Grandma, did you iron my green silk dress? The one for the gallery opening tonight? I left it on your bed this morning. I look at my granddaughter. She has my mother's high cheekbones, but her eyes are cold, empty of the warmth that used to define our family before the money grew too large for us to carry. I haven't had a chance to get to it yet, Chloe, I say. My hip was quite stiff this morning. Chloe groans, a soft, theatrical sound of exasperation. Grandma, it takes 5 minutes. The event starts at 7. If I wear it wrinkled, I'll look like a slob. I'll do it later, Chloe, I say, reaching for my chipped cup. Thanks, she mutters, already looking back down at her screen. I take a sip of the lukewarm tea. It is bitter. They don't know about the locked cabinet in the basement behind the old fruit crates Arthur built. They don't know about the black leather ledger written in my father's precise draftsman's hand, or the original unamended partnership agreement from 1978. Julian believes he completed the corporate transition last month, transferring the final voting shares of Vance Holdings to his name. He believes my signature on the disclosure documents was just a formality, signed by an old woman who didn't understand what she was reading. What Julian's high-priced corporate lawyers failed to realize, and what Julian's sheer arrogance prevented him from checking, is that Vance Holdings does not own the patents for the routing software that runs their entire fleet. I do. And the lease on those patents expires in exactly 30 days. I'm going to lie down for a bit, I say, pushing myself up from the table. My hip twinges, but I do not let my face betray the pain. Good idea, Mother, Julian says, already looking back at his tablet. Get some rest. Don't forget the dress, Grandma, Chloe calls out as I reach the hallway. I don't answer. I walk down the long, dim corridor toward my small room, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer echoing behind me like a slow, steady countdown. My room is cold. It sits on the north side of the house, where the central heating vents only sigh instead of blow, the air smelling faintly of basement damp and old floorboards. I pull the heavy metal ironing board down from the closet. It screeches against the doorframe, a sharp metallic bite that always makes my teeth hurt. Chloe's green silk dress is slippery and thin. As I set the iron to its lowest setting, my fingers feel stiff, the joints swollen from the damp autumn weather. I press the pleats with slow, deliberate movements. The steam rises, carrying the sterile scent of starch and scorched lavender. Through the thin wall behind me, I can hear the muffled rumble of the plumbing. Julian taking his second shower of the day. I look at my nightstand. Beside Arthur's silent silver pocket watch sits a chipped blue willow saucer, holding 3 small white pills. My blood pressure medication. I haven't taken them yet today. My chest has a strange, hollow tightness in it. But it isn't from my heart. It is the weight of the silence in this house.
When the dress is smooth, I drape it carefully over my arm and carry it down the long hallway. As I near the morning room, the sound of unfamiliar laughter stops me. "We need to open up the sight lines," a man's voice says, sharp, nasal, and overly confident. The decorator Victoria hired. "If we strip out the heavy wainscoting and get rid of that bulky velvet armchair, we can bring in a minimalist linen chaise. It will pull the light from the garden." "Oh, absolutely," Victoria's voice responds. It has that breezy, effortless quality she uses when she is spending money she didn't earn. "That chair is dreadful. It's my mother-in-law's. She insists on keeping it there because she says the light is good for her eyes, but it completely ruins the flow of the room. It's practically falling apart anyway." The chair is a wingback, covered in faded blue velvet. Arthur bought it for me the winter Claire was born, when my back was so raw with pain I couldn't sleep flat. I spent hundreds of nights in that chair, rocking both of my children through fevers and teething, watching the sunrise through the eastern window. I step into the doorway. The decorator, a young man in an immaculate linen shirt, blenches slightly when he sees me. Victoria doesn't blink. She merely smooths her skirt and offers her practiced, charitable smile. "Eleanor, oh, perfect timing," she says, her voice dripping with medicinal sweetness. "We were just talking about updating the morning room. Don't you think a nice, clean, modern look would be so much brighter for you? It will feel much less heavy." "I like the blue chair, Victoria," I say. My voice is quiet, but it doesn't shake. "It fits my back." "Well, of course it does," Victoria says, stepping closer and placing a cold, manicured hand on my forearm. "But we have to think about the house as a whole. We're hosting the executive board from Great Lakes Logistics next month, and Julian needs the estate to look polished. We can find a much better, modern orthopedic chair for your bedroom. Out of sight, you know?" Julian walks into the room holding a glass of iced water. He looks at me, then at the green dress on my arm, and finally at Victoria. "What's the holdup?" "Julian, dear, I was just explaining to your mother that we're going to donate the blue velvet chair," Victoria says, her hand sliding from my arm to his shoulder. "She's a bit attached to it." Julian sighs, a short, dry puff of air. "Mother, it's just a chair. Victoria's right. It's lived its life. Besides, you spend most of your time in your room now anyway. It makes sense to keep your personal items in there." Your personal items. As if the home I lived in for 50 years is now a museum, and I am a patron who has stayed past closing time, slowly being ushered toward the exit. "Your father bought that chair when Claire was born, Julian," I say softly. "He saved for 3 months to get the one with the correct lumbar support."
Julian looks down at his glass, swirling the ice. Dad bought a lot of things, Mother. We can't keep this house looking like a 1970s time capsule out of sentimentality. Business is changing, and our image has to change with it. The movers are coming on Wednesday to clear out the excess furniture. Just let Victoria handle it. He turns back to the decorator, dismissing me without another word. The young man avoids my eyes, suddenly very interested in his fabric swatches. I walk up the stairs to Chloe's room. The door is open and she is lying on her bed, her dirty boots resting on the white duvet, typing rapidly on her laptop. I hang the green silk dress on the hook behind her door. "It's done, Chloe," I say. "Thanks," she mutters, her eyes never leaving her screen. "Did you use the heavy starch? The collar always sags if you don't." "I ironed it the way I have always ironed it," I say. She doesn't reply. I stand in her doorway for a moment, waiting for something. A thank you, an inquiry about my hip, a simple acknowledgement that I am a human being standing in front of her. Nothing comes. The only sound is the frantic, rhythmic clicking of her keyboard. I walk back down to my small bedroom at the end of the hall. The draft under the door is stronger now as the afternoon wind picks up, rattling the loose window pane. I sit on the edge of my narrow mattress and pull my old gray flip phone from my apron pocket. Julian has tried to make me throw it away 3 times, claiming it looks embarrassing when I take it out in public. I press the keys, dialing a number I have memorized since 1982. It rings twice before a gravelly, familiar voice answers. "Eleanor?" "Hello, Frank," I say, looking at the faded damask wallpaper of my small room. "I hope I didn't disturb you." "Never," Frank Miller says. He was Arthur's first corporate attorney, now retired and living in a quiet cabin upstate. He is the only person left who remembers the night we signed the original partnership charters on my kitchen table. "Is everything all right?" "Julian is donating the blue chair on Wednesday," I say quietly. There is a long pause on the other end of the line. I can hear the crackle of static and the slow, heavy breath of an old friend who understands the exact weight of what has just been broken. "I see," Frank says, his voice hardening. "Then the grace period is over?" "Yes," I say, tracing the silver casing of Arthur's pocket watch with my cold finger. "Send the formal notice to the Great Lakes Board. Let them know the proprietary lease on the routing software will not be renewed next month." "They'll panic, Eleanor. Julian's entire logistics network will halt within 48 hours. "I know," I say, and for the first time in 2 years, my voice feels warm. "Let them." The white donation truck arrives at 9 on Wednesday morning, its tires crunching heavily over the wet gravel of the driveway. I stand by the kitchen window, my fingers wrapped around the chipped handle of my blue Willow cup, watching 2 young men in grease-stained t-shirts climb the porch steps. Victoria meets them at the door. Her voice carries clearly through the hallway, sharp and instructional. "Be careful of the wainscoting. The blue chair in the morning room, yes, that one. It goes straight into the back. It's old, so you don't need to wrap it." I watch them carry the chair out. In the harsh gray light of the rainy morning, the blue velvet looks faded, almost gray itself. A small tuft of white stuffing leaks from the seam near the right armrest, the exact spot where Arthur's old golden retriever used to rest his heavy chin 30 years ago. I remember the night we brought that dog home, wet and shivering from a November storm, and how Arthur had laughed when the pup claimed the chair before we had even finished unpacking. "You okay, Mother?" Julian stands beside the kitchen island, adjusting his silk tie. He doesn't look at me. He is staring at the coffee maker, waiting for the espresso to drip. "Victoria's right, you know. That room is going to look twice as large without that monster in the corner." "It has my memories, Julian," I say softly. He pats my shoulder, 2 quick, clinical taps that feel more like checking an item off a list than an act of affection. "We're building new memories, Mother. That's what Dad would have wanted.
We have to keep moving forward. He doesn't know what his father wanted. By the end, Arthur was too tired to want anything but a quiet room and the sound of the rain. We both gave up our lives to build this family's security, but Julian only remembers the numbers on the ledger. To him, history is just depreciated asset value. By 3 in the afternoon, Claire's car door slams in the driveway. She doesn't come to find me. She goes straight to Julian's study. I am in the kitchen, paring potatoes for a stew they will likely barely touch, and the heating vents carry their voices with perfect clarity. "Julian, Chloe's transmission is completely shot," Claire says, her voice thin with high-register panic. "The mechanic wants $4,000. I don't have that right now." "I can't float you another loan, Claire." Julian's voice is muffled but firm. "We've got all our liquid capital tied up in the Great Lakes merger. Every penny is leveraged." "Well, what is she supposed to do? Walk to her classes?" Claire snaps. "What about Mom's Buick? It's just sitting in the garage. Mom hasn't driven it since her doctor's appointment in July." "Actually," Julian says, his tone shifting into that thoughtful, calculating key he uses when he finds an administrative shortcut. "That's a practical solution. Mother shouldn't really be driving anyway. Her reflexes are slower, and her eyesight, honestly, it's a liability. We've been talking about taking the keys. We'll just sign the title over to Chloe." My Buick. A silver 2012 LeSabre, with barely 30,000 miles on the odometer. It was the last thing Arthur bought me, a week before his diagnosis. It is my only way out of this house. It is how I go to the pharmacy, how I buy my own tea, and how I visit Arthur's grave on Sunday mornings when the house gets too loud to bear. The study door opens, and their footsteps approach the kitchen. Claire enters first, a bright, fragile smile pinned to her face, the exact smile she used as a teenage girl when she wanted me to overlook a dent in my fender. "Mom," she says, leaning against the counter. "We were just thinking about the garage. It's getting so crowded with Julian's new riding mower, and we were worried about your Buick getting scratched." "The Buick is fine, Claire," I say, keeping my eyes on the potato in my hand, the brown skin curling away under my blade.
"Well, yes, but Chloe's car is in the shop," Claire continues, her voice dropping into a soft, coaxing tone. "And since you aren't driving much these days, really, it's not safe with the winter weather coming. We thought it would be wonderful if Chloe could take it up to campus, just for the semester." "No," I say. The word is small, but it drops into the room like a stone. Claire's smile stiffens. "Mom, don't be difficult," she says, her tone instantly losing its warmth. "It's a waste for that car to just sit there while your granddaughter is stranded." "I use my car, Claire. I need it." "Mother, let's be realistic," Julian says, stepping into the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, his posture commanding. "You drove it twice last month. It's a luxury we can't justify when we have a family member in need. I'll have Victoria transfer the insurance policy to Chloe's name tonight. We'll get the keys from your dresser." They don't ask. They inform. I look down at my hands. They are spotted with age, the skin thin as parchment, but they do not shake. "The keys are in my purse, Julian." "Good," he says, nodding once. "Glad we could resolve this quickly." They walk away, leaving me with the half-peeled potatoes. That evening, the house smells of garlic and rosemary. Victoria has ordered catering from the French bistro downtown to celebrate the preliminary board approval for the Great Lakes merger. We sit around the mahogany table. I am at the far end, next to the empty archway where the morning room used to show my blue chair. Now, there is only a blank, shadowed space,
the carpet underneath showing 4 deep, permanent indentations where the brass casters used to rest. I press my foot against the floor, feeling those empty hollows through my slippers. "To the future of Vance Logistics," Julian says, raising his crystal glass of Cabernet. "To the future," Victoria echoes, clinking her glass against his. Claire and Chloe join in, laughing. Chloe has already put her new keychain on the table next to her plate, the silver Cadillac emblem Arthur gave me for our anniversary. Suddenly, Julian's phone on the table buzzes, a harsh, vibrating rattle against the polished wood. He frowns, checking the screen. An unknown number. He swift declines it. 2 seconds later, it buzzes again. Then his laptop on the sideboard chimes with an incoming email notification. Then another. Then Victoria's phone sitting in her lap begins to ring. Julian's brow furrows as he opens his email. I watch his face. The celebratory flush in his cheeks slowly drains, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. He stands up so fast his chair scrapes loudly against the hardwood floor. "What is it, Julian?" Victoria asks, her wineglass stopping halfway to her lips. "Nothing," Julian mutters, his voice tight and strangely thin. He is scrolling furiously, his thumb trembling slightly against the screen. "A system error. The server must be... There has to be a mistake. Excuse me." He walks quickly toward his study, his heels slamming against the floorboards. I take a slow, quiet sip of my water. Across the table, the empty alcove waits in the shadows. The first thread has been pulled, and they are still admiring the tapestry. The house is awake long before the sun rises. I lie in my narrow bed, listening to the heavy, rhythmic pacing of Julian's leather-soled shoes in the hallway directly above my ceiling. Doors slam. The pipes groan as the hot water is run, shut off, and run again. When I finally wrap my knit shawl around my shoulders and step into the kitchen at 7, the room feels like a war room. The marble island is buried under piles of printouts, tablets, and color-coded folders. Julian is standing near the window, his phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles are white. He is red-faced, his tie undone, his shirt collar damp with sweat. "I don't care about the legacy team's excuses," he barks into the receiver. The routing engine is the spine of our entire distribution network. If the Great Lakes Board sees even a whisper of a proprietary dispute, the merger is dead before the ink is dry. Find out who owns this holding company. Victoria is leaning over his shoulder, her face unusually pale, her hair uncharacteristically messy. When I reach toward the cabinet to get my small loaf of rye bread, her elbow brushes my arm, pushing me back a step. She doesn't look at me. She doesn't apologize. "Eleanor, please, not right now," she says, her voice snapping like a dry twig. "We're in the middle of an absolute crisis. Go eat in your room." I stand there for a second, my plate empty in my hand. I am not a mother to them, nor even a resident. I am a physical obstacle, an inconvenient ghost blocking the view of their panic. I quietly place the plate back in the cupboard, take a single glass of water, and return to my room. Through my small north-facing window, I watch Chloe pack my silver Buick. She is throwing heavy duffel bags into the back seat, not caring as the metal buckles of her luggage scrape against the pristine silver paint. She doesn't know how to close the trunk gently. Arthur always told her you had to let it drop from 6 inches, otherwise the latch would stick. She slams it hard, 3 times, her face twisted in adolescent annoyance, before finally kicking the bumper with her boot. She throws a plastic fast food cup onto my gravel driveway, gets into the driver's seat, and backs out far too fast. The rear tires spray small stones against my window pane with a sound like gunfire. The silver Cadillac keychain Arthur gave me jingles against the steering column as she speeds away, disappearing onto the main road. My car is gone. My bridge to the outside world, traded for their convenience. I sit on the edge of my bed, feeling the cold draft seeping through the glass, and write the date in my pocket calendar. October 12th. Buick taken. By midday, the rain has cleared, leaving a pale, freezing blue sky that does nothing to warm the drafty rooms. Julian comes to my door. He doesn't knock. He simply pushes it open, holding a stack of empty cardboard boxes. "Mother, we need the attic cleared out by Friday," he says. He is breathing heavily, his voice tight and aggressive. "The auditors from Great Lakes need a physical space to review our hard copy records for the due diligence phase. There are boxes of Dad's old journals and your sewing things up there. Victoria is going to help you bag them up for Goodwill." "Those are your father's personal diaries, Julian," I say softly. "And my mother's sewing machine. It still works." "We don't have room for sentimentality right now, Mother," he says, his voice rising in frustration. "The company is facing a massive legal hurdle. Some shadow entity called the Lydia Group has filed an injunction claiming we've been using their proprietary routing algorithms without a valid lease. Our legal team is frantic. Do you ever remember Dad talking about a Lydia Group?" I look at my son. His eyes are wide, bloodshot with fatigue and anxiety. He genuinely does not know. To him, the name Lydia is just a string of letters on a terrifying legal brief. He has completely forgotten that Lydia was his grandmother, the quiet, hard-working woman who used to bake him apple pies in the small kitchen in Cicero back when we were still scraping by. He has erased her from his memory, just as he is erasing me. "I don't recall Arthur mentioning it," I say, my voice smooth and level. "Fine," he snaps, dropping the cardboard boxes onto my floor with a dusty thud. "Just get the attic sorted. We need those files moved. And Mother, if any lawyers call the house phone, don't answer it. We're routing everything through my office." He turns and leaves, slamming my bedroom door hard enough to make the small framed photograph of Arthur on my nightstand tilt. I reach out and straighten the frame. Arthur's face looks back at me, frozen in his 30-year-old smile, back when we were partners. The exclusion is nearly complete now. They have taken my room, my chair, my car, and now they want to throw my history into plastic trash bags. But the Lydia Group is about to speak, and this time, Julian will have no choice but to listen. The attic smells of dried pine, dust, and ancient paper. It is hot up here, the rising heat of the house trapped beneath the roof, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. I sit on a low wooden stool, my knees aching from the climb, sorting through a box of Arthur's old leather-bound planners from the early 90s. Victoria stands near the eaves, holding a black plastic garbage bag. She moves with an impatient efficiency, her jewelry clinking sharply with every gesture. "We don't need to keep these old tax returns, Eleanor," she says, grabbing a thick blue binder and tossing it into the bag. It lands with a heavy, hollow thump. "The IRS doesn't care about what Vance Logistics did in 1994. It's just taking up space." "Those binders contain the names of our first 6 drivers, Victoria," I say, my voice raspy from the dust. 2 of them froze to death in the blizzard of '96, trying to deliver a shipment of medical supplies to upstate clinics. Arthur wanted their families to always have a record of what they did. Victoria stops, letting out a small, irritated sigh. She looks at me as if I am a child, struggling with a basic arithmetic problem. "Eleanor, we are trying to save a multi-million-dollar merger. We do not have the time or the space to hold a wake for truck drivers from 30 years ago. If it isn't legally required for the audit, it's trash." She reaches past me, her hand gripping the heavy iron handle of my mother's old Singer sewing machine. "This is rusted. It's useless." Before I can protest, she drags it toward the attic stairs, the metal base scraping a deep, permanent gouge into the pine floorboards. She treats my life like clutter, an accumulation of useless obstacles to be cleared away so she can paint the house in her preferred shades of modern gray and beige. I watch her descend the stairs, my mother's machine clattering against the steps as she goes. I do not argue. Instead, I quietly reach into the bottom of the box Victoria missed. Beneath a stack of old ledger sheets, my fingers find what I was looking for. A small, faded green metal lockbox. I slide it under my shawl, press it against my ribs, and slowly climb down the stairs. By 7 in the evening, the house is filled with the rich, heavy scent of roasting garlic and beef tenderloin. Julian has invited his chief financial officer, a man named Henderson, to discuss the patent crisis. I wash my hands in my small bathroom and walk into the dining room. The table is beautifully set, but there are only 3 placemats: Julian, Victoria, and Henderson. My chair, the one at the far end of the table, has been pushed against the wall to make room for Henderson's leather briefcase. Victoria looks up as I enter the room. Her eyes flick briefly to Julian before landing on me, her expression instantly shifting into that smooth, apologetic mask she wears so well. "Oh, Eleanor," she says, her voice hushed and conspiratorial. "We're having a rather confidential business dinner tonight. Julian needs to go over some very sensitive financial data with Mr. Henderson. I left some of the beef stew from yesterday in the microwave for you. You don't mind eating in your room tonight, do you? It's much quieter for your nerves anyway." Mr. Henderson looks down at his silverware, his collar suddenly looking very tight, but he says nothing. Julian doesn't even look up from his glass. He is pouring red wine, his hand slightly unsteady. "Make sure you take your blood pressure medication, Mother. We don't need any emergencies tonight." I look at the 3 of them. I look at the empty space where my chair used to be, the faded wallpaper behind it. The emotional distance in this room is no longer a gap, it is a canyon, and I am standing on the opposite cliff watching them feast. "I'll eat in my room," I say. I walk to the kitchen, retrieve the cold bowl of stew, and carry it down the hallway to my bedroom. I do not heat it up. The cold grease sticks to the roof of my mouth, tasting of salt and neglect, but I swallow every bite. I sit in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and the clinking of crystal stemware drifting from the dining room. They are toast-making their future, completely unaware that the glass they are holding is already cracked. At 10 o'clock, the house finally grows quiet. Henderson's car tires crunch over the gravel driveway as he leaves. My old gray flip phone vibrates in my apron pocket. I flip it open, the blue light illuminating my dark room. "Eleanor," Frank's voice says, carrying the quiet gravity of a judge delivering a sentence. "The formal injunction has been served to the Great Lakes Board. Julian's legal team received the cease and desist an hour ago. They have exactly 72 hours to produce a valid licensing agreement for the routing software, or Great Lakes pulls out of the merger." "How did Julian take it?" I ask, my voice a whisper against the dark. "He's frantic. He spent the last 2 hours screaming at his attorneys to find the original contract in the company archives. But they won't find it, Eleanor." "No," I say, my eyes moving to the green metal lockbox sitting on my nightstand, the key already turned in the lock. "They won't." Inside that box, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, lies the original 1998 patent lease. And the signature at the bottom of the page, the one that controls the exclusive rights to every logistics route between Chicago and New York, isn't Arthur's. It is mine. The rain has stopped, but the dampness has settled deep into the plaster of the house, making my joints ache with a dull, persistent throbbing. I stand in the dark of the kitchen pantry, reaching for a tin of soup, when the sound of footsteps on the hardwood floor freezes me. Claire and Victoria walk into the kitchen. The swing door clicks shut behind them, and they begin to speak in those low, conspiratorial tones people use when they believe they are entirely alone. Honestly, Julian is at his wits' end, Victoria says, her voice carrying a sharp, metallic edge. If this merger falls through, the bank is going to initiate a full audit of our personal assets. The covenants on the bridge loan are very strict. Well, what about Mom? Claire asks, her voice rising slightly before she catches herself. If we have to downsize the estate, we can't exactly fit her into a 3-bedroom condo with us. She's becoming so difficult to manage anyway. Did you see how she behaved about those dusty old binders in the attic? It's borderline hoarding. I know, Victoria sighs, the sound of a cupboard opening as she searches for a glass. I actually spoke to Julian about the assisted living place over in Oakbrook, the Linden Lodge. It's lovely, really. They have a dedicated memory care wing. With her blood pressure and the way she's been withdrawing lately, it's probably for the best. We can use the proceeds from selling her Buick to cover the entrance deposit. Selling her Buick. The car they had borrowed for Chloe's college semester. It was never a loan. It was an asset liquidation in progress, planned behind my back while I washed their dishes. I stand in the shadows of the pantry, the cold tin of soup heavy and frozen in my hand. I listen to my own children discuss my removal from the living world, planning my displacement as if I were nothing more than a piece of worn-out furniture they no longer had room for. My chest feels tight, but my heart beats with a slow, cold precision. At noon, they are sitting at the kitchen island, eating salad from plastic containers. I step out of the pantry and join them, climbing slowly onto the edge of a high bar stool. Did she take her morning pills? Claire asks Victoria, looking right past my face as if I were a pane of glass. I left them on her nightstand, Victoria replies, her fork clicking sharply against her teeth. But you know how she gets. She forgets, or she hides them. We really need to get her on a formal schedule. I am sitting right here, Claire, I say quietly. Claire looks at me then, her expression a shallow mix of irritation and superficial pity. Mom, we're just concerned about your health. You've been so quiet lately, sitting in that dark room. It's not healthy. We're only trying to help you. By looking at Linden Lodge in Oakbrook? I ask. Claire's fork stops halfway to her mouth. She glances quickly at Victoria, who smooths her linen napkin with a slow, deliberate stroke of her fingers. We're just looking at options, Eleanor, Victoria says, her voice as smooth and cold as marble. In case the stairs become too much for you. It's called planning for the future. They do not see the woman who ran the logistics fleet during the Teamsters strike of '89. They do not see the woman who kept the books balanced when the bank threatened to padlock our gates. They only see an old, inconvenient body that is taking up valuable real estate. At 4 p.m, Julian's study door slams open. He storms down the hallway and pushes his way into my bedroom. His face is pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looks like a man who is watching his own execution. Mother, he says, his voice dangerously quiet as he closes the door behind him. I need you to think. Dad's old filing cabinets from the Cicero office, the ones we moved here after we closed the freight depot. Where are they? The movers put them in the basement, Julian, I say, sitting in my straight-backed chair by the window. In the crawl space behind the water heater. We searched the crawl space. They aren't there. He steps closer, his breathing ragged and uneven. There has to be a copy of the 1998 software lease. The Lydia Group is claiming we are in default of a 20-year proprietary agreement.
If we don't find that document, the bank is going to call our personal lines of credit. Do you understand what that means? This house, the company, everything is leveraged against the merger. If Great Lakes pulls out, we lose it all. He reaches down and grabs my forearm, his fingers digging into my thin, fragile skin with a desperate, frantic pressure. Think, Mother. Did Dad sign a renewal? Did he mention a trust? You have to remember. I do not flinch. I do not pull away. I simply look down at his hand on my arm, the thick, manicured fingers of my firstborn son, whom I held in this very room when he was nothing but a fragile, breathing bundle. He is squeezing my arm hard enough to leave a dark bruise on my paper-thin skin. He follows my gaze down to his hand. He freezes, a flicker of raw realization crossing his face, and slowly lets go of my arm. He steps back, his chest heaving, but he does not apologize. "I'm sorry," he mutters, rubbing his face with his trembling hands. "But you don't understand the pressure I'm under. If we don't find that lease, we have less than 72 hours before the Great Lakes Board votes to dissolve the merger." "I understand pressure, Julian," I say, looking out at the bare, black branches of the oak tree in the yard. "I survived 40 years of it. But you only see the storm. You never look at the foundation." He stares at me, a flicker of deep confusion and sudden unease in his eyes, before his phone begins to vibrate in his pocket and he rushes from the room. I look down at my forearm, where the faint red marks of his fingers are already beginning to turn a dull, bruised blue. I pull my sleeve down to cover it. The countdown has begun, and my son is running out of time. The bruise on my forearm has bloomed into a deep, plum-colored crescent. I touch the edge of it with my finger, feeling the dull, hot ache beneath the skin. I pull a heavy wool cardigan from my closet, wrapping it tightly around myself to cover the mark and keep out the morning chill that always seems to find its way through my bedroom walls. I am sitting at the kitchen table, watching the gray light struggle through the window, when Claire walks in. She is holding her tablet, her face set in that tight administrative mask she wears when she has to perform an unpleasant duty. She doesn't offer to make tea. She doesn't ask how I slept. She simply sits opposite me, her posture rigid. "Mom, we need to talk about your checking account," she says, tapping the screen of her tablet. "The bank flagged a $15,000 wire transfer last week. It went to a private escrow account in Delaware. Julian and I, well, we think your accounts should be placed under joint control now." "That money was mine, Claire," I say, my voice level. "It came from my personal savings." "It doesn't matter whose savings it was, Mom," Claire says, her voice rising in that defensive, sharp register she uses when she is cornered. "You're 71 years old, and you're making erratic financial decisions. With Julian facing this massive patent crisis, we can't afford to have you throwing money into shadow accounts. We need to protect your assets. I've already printed the paperwork to establish Julian and me as co-guardians of your estate." Co-guardians. The word sits in the quiet room like a heavy iron collar. They are not just taking my car or my chair anymore. They are preparing to legally declare me incompetent, to strip away the last shreds of my autonomy, all to protect their own desperate cash flow. "I am not senile, Claire," I say softly. "No one is saying you are, Mom," Claire sighs, her tone shifting into a patronizing, medical sweetness that makes my skin crawl. "But you're withdrawing. You spend all your time in your room. You're hoarding old papers. It's for your own safety, really. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." She stands up, taking her tablet with her,
leaving the silent room colder than it was before. After she leaves, I walk down the hallway toward Julian's study, the room that used to be Arthur's office, where we spent winter nights drinking cheap coffee from styrofoam cups, filing freight manifests when we only had 3 trucks to our name. The heavy oak door is closed. On the brass handle, there is a new, shiny digital keypad lock, its small blue light blinking in the dim corridor. I reach out and touch the cold metal of the keypad. Julian must have installed it last night while I was sleeping in my small room at the end of the hall. He has locked me out of the company's history. He thinks the truth is a physical thing, something he can secure behind a 6-digit code, completely unaware that the code doesn't matter when the foundation beneath the room is already turning to sand. I stand in the quiet hallway, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, feeling the absolute weight of my exclusion. I am a prisoner in the house I built. I return to my room, locking the door behind me. I pull the green metal lockbox from under my bed, opening it with the small brass key I keep tucked inside my pillowcase. I look at the original 1998 lease agreement, my finger tracing my own signature at the bottom of the yellowed paper. My gray flip phone vibrates in my apron pocket. I open it, pressing it to my ear. "Eleanor?" Frank's gravelly voice says, carrying the sharp professional focus of an attorney entering a courtroom. "Julian's legal team just sent a formal buyout offer to the Lydia Group's representation. They are offering $2 million for the permanent transfer of the routing software patents." $2 million, I murmur, looking at the bare branches of the oak tree outside my window. They must be terrified. "They are," Frank says. "The Great Lakes Board meets tomorrow morning at 10 to finalize the merger. If the patent dispute isn't resolved by then, the board will officially withdraw and the bank will initiate immediate foreclosure on Vance Holdings. Julian has leveraged everything." "And what did you tell them?" "I haven't responded yet," Frank says, his voice dropping. "I was waiting for your word, Eleanor. If we reject this, there is no turning back. The company will collapse." "Reject the offer, Frank," I say, my voice steady, cold, and quiet. "And file the motion for a full, independent forensic audit of Vance Holdings' financial records, dating back to 1998. There is a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I can hear the distant sound of static, and then Frank's slow, deep exhalation. "Eleanor, an independent audit will expose Julian's unauthorized borrowing," Frank says, his voice tight with concern. "He's been moving funds from the Employee Pension Trust to cover his short-term losses for the last 3 years. If that comes to light, it won't just destroy the company. It will destroy him. He could face federal charges." I look down at my forearm. I pull back my sleeve, exposing the dark, plum-colored bruise my son left on my skin when he grabbed me in his panic. I think of Victoria dragging my mother's sewing machine to the garbage, of Claire planning to lock me away in Oak Brook to pay for her daughter's college. "The truth doesn't destroy, Frank," I say softly, my voice filled with 30 years of accumulated exhaustion. "It merely uncovers what was already broken. File the motion." "Very well, Eleanor," Frank whispers. "It will be filed before the court closes today." I close the phone and set it on the nightstand beside Arthur's silent pocket watch. The storm is no longer approaching. It is here, and my family is about to find out exactly how cold the wind can blow. The dawn is a thin, watery sliver of white light slicing through the heavy autumn fog. The house is silent, but it is the tense, vibrating silence of a machine running at too high a speed, heat rising from the gears just before they lock. I walk into the kitchen. The marble island is sticky with dried wine from the previous nights, and the sink is piled high with the greasy plates and copper pans from Victoria's catered celebration.
Victoria herself is standing by the silver pantry cabinets, her hair in a messy plastic claw clip, her silk robe stained with coffee. She is frantically throwing boxes of tea and baking sheets onto the counter. "Eleanor, where are the keys to the cellar storage?" she asks, her voice sharp with a rising, uncontrolled panic. "Julian needs the old Cicero filing cabinets. The lawyers called at 6. Some independent motion was filed late yesterday afternoon, and the Great Lakes directors are threatening to freeze the entire merger vote unless we produce the 98 paper ledgers." "The keys are in Julian's study, Victoria," I say, pouring myself a glass of tap water. "In the brass tray by the door." "They aren't there. We've looked everywhere." She slams a cabinet door shut, the glass rattling in its frame. "Everything in this house is a disaster. Why haven't the dishes been done? The kitchen smells like stale fat." "I was resting my hip, Victoria," I say softly, taking a slow sip of my water. "You told me last week that my presence in the kitchen was cluttering the space. I didn't want to get in your way." She looks at me, her eyes flashing with anger. But beneath the anger, there is a sudden, helpless frustration. For months, they have treated my daily labor, the quiet wiping of counters, the laundering of sheets, the invisible, rhythmic maintenance of this massive house, as if it happened by magic. Now that I have simply folded my hands and stepped back, the dirt and chaos are rising around them like a tide. They are discovering just how much they depend on the ghost they tried to evict. Claire comes running down the stairs, her face streaked with mascara, her phone clutched in a trembling hand. "Julian! Julian!" she cries, ignoring Victoria and running straight toward the locked study door. "The bank just froze my personal line of credit. They said there's a material litigation risk flagged on the family accounts. Chloe's registrar called. If the tuition wire doesn't clear by noon, they're going to lock her out of her dorm." The study door clicks open. Julian steps out. He looks 20 years older than he did yesterday. His skin is a gray, papery color, his shirt is wrinkled, and his hands are shaking so badly he has to slide them into his pockets to hide it. He doesn't look at his sister. He doesn't look at his wife. He looks at me, standing quietly by the kitchen sink. "Mother," he says, his voice cracked and dry, stripped of all its executive authority. "The 98 ledger, Dad's handwritten one. The black book with the brass clasp. Where is it?" "Your father kept many books, Julian," I say. "The Cicero ledger, Mother," he yells, his composure finally fracturing. "The one where he recorded the private equity transfers from the early days. It's not in the cellar safe. It's not in the study. If we don't produce that ledger to the forensic auditors by noon, they're going to freeze our commercial accounts. They think there was a discrepancy in the pension fund transfers." He walks toward me, his breathing ragged, but he stops when he is 3 feet away. The smell of fear is on him, stale sweat and cheap cologne. He looks at me, and for the first time in 2 years, he looks at me as a person. He realizes that the old woman he tried to relegate to a guest room is the only one who knows where the foundation stones are buried. "Let's talk in your room, Mother," he mutters, his voice dropping into a desperate, pleading whisper. "Please." I turn and walk down the hallway to my bedroom, Julian following close behind, like a child who has lost his way in the dark. I sit in my straight-back chair by the window. Julian does not sit on my bed. He stands near the door, his shoulders slumped, his executive posture completely collapsed. "Mom," he says, using the word for the first time since Arthur's funeral. "You have to help me. I did what I had to do to keep the logistics division afloat during the pandemic. I borrowed from the employee pension trust. It was a short-term loan. I was going to put every penny back as soon as the Great Lakes capital cleared. I swear to you." He steps closer, his eyes wet with a pathetic, desperate self-pity. "But the auditors, they found the wire transfer slips, and they have Dad's signature on them." A cold, heavy stillness settles into my chest. I look at my son. Your father died 2 years ago, Julian. The pension transfers were dated last winter. Julian looks down at his polished shoes, his jaw working as he swallows. I had to, Mom. The bank wouldn't approve the bridge loan without Dad's personal guarantee on the historical trust assets. I used his old signature stamp from the Cicero office. It was a formality. If we can find the '98 ledger, I can prove that Dad authorized the initial trust structures. It will look like a continuation. It will save me from the board. Please. Where is the black book? I look at my firstborn. He did not just ignore me. He did not just treat me like an unpaid servant. He desecrated his dead father's name to cover his own greed, and now he is begging me to hand him the shovel to bury the truth. I don't know what to tell you, Julian, I say, my voice entirely empty of warmth, empty of anger, empty of anything but the cold light of the morning. He stares at me, his eyes slowly widening as a sudden, terrible realization begins to dawn in his gaze. He looks at my dresser, then down at my apron pockets. You, he whispers, his voice shaking. You were the one who archived the Cicero records after Dad died. You're the only one who had the combination to his personal vault. The silence in the small room stretches between us, heavy and absolute, as my son finally realizes exactly whose hands are holding his life. The heavy brass knocker on the front door sounds at exactly 10 o'clock. In the dining room, the sound echoes like a gavel. Julian flinches, his tablet slipping from his slick, sweating palm and clattering onto the mahogany table. Claire is sitting in the corner, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking in silent, exhausted weeping. Victoria stands by the sideboard, her fingers clutching the edge of the wood so hard her knuckles are white, her perfect hair starting to fray. None of them moves to answer the door. They are frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating weight of their impending ruin. I stand up from my chair. My hip aches, but I do not show it. I walk down the long, dim hallway and open the heavy front door. Frank stands on the porch. He is wearing his old charcoal overcoat, carrying a single, slim leather folder under his arm. He looks at me, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second before he nods and steps into the foyer. They're in the dining room, Frank, I say quietly. He follows me back into the room. Julian instantly rushes toward him, his face a desperate, frantic mask of hope. Frank, thank God, Julian gasps, his voice trembling. Did they accept the buyout? Is the Great Lakes merger still on? Tell me you secured the patent lease from the Lydia Group. Frank doesn't look at my son. He walks past him, past Victoria, and stands beside my place at the head of the table. He opens the leather folder and lays 3 identical, thick documents onto the polished mahogany. The Great Lakes Board has concluded their meeting, Julian, Frank says, his voice carrying the cold, flat resonance of an absolute authority. But they did not vote on a merger. What do you mean? Julian's voice cracks, his eyes darting frantically between Frank and the papers. What did they do? Late yesterday afternoon, the Lydia Group purchased the entirety of Vance Holdings' outstanding commercial debt from the bank, Frank explains, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the foreclosure on this estate and all logistics terminals has been permanently halted. Julian lets out a loud, ragged breath, a pathetic laugh of pure relief escaping his throat. He turns to Victoria, his chest heaving. We're saved. We're still in the game. Frank, who is the principal shareholder of the Lydia Group? I'll sign the management transition papers immediately.
I can stay on as chief operating officer. I know the routes better than anyone. Frank reaches into his pocket, pulls out a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen, and places it gently on top of the documents. There is no chief operating officer position, Julian, Frank says softly. The new owner of the Lydia Group has initiated a complete, non-negotiable liquidation of all current management. The bank accounts for Vance Holdings have been closed. You, Victoria, and Claire have exactly 30 days to vacate this property. The silence that falls over the room is sudden, vast, and deafening.
Claire's weeping stops instantly. She looks up, her eyes wide and blank with horror. Victoria slowly sinks into one of the high-backed dining chairs, her mouth opening slightly, staring at Frank as if he were speaking a foreign language. "Vacate?" Julian whispers, his face turning a sickly, mottled red. "This is my father's house. This is my company. Who has the capital to buy out our entire debt structure? Who is the Lydia Group?" "The Lydia Group is a private trust, registered in Delaware in 1998, Frank says. He turns to me, his hand gesturing toward the papers. "Funded entirely by the personal inheritance of Eleanor's mother, Lydia Vance. It was established to protect the proprietary patents Eleanor wrote herself during the company's inception." Julian freezes. His gaze slowly moves from Frank down to the documents on the table, and finally to the signature block at the bottom of the page. Eleanor Vance, Principal Trustee, the Lydia Group. He steps back, his knees buckling slightly, his hands shaking so violently he has to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling. "You?" he whispers, his voice strangled, barely audible. "You did this? You destroyed my father's legacy?" "No, Julian," I say, my voice steady, cold, and quiet, as I pick up my blue willow cup. "Your father and I built this legacy with our bare hands. You merely mortgaged it to pay for a life you never earned. I did not destroy it. I simply took it back." Victoria looks at me, the polished, manipulative mask she has worn for years completely shattered, leaving her face looking old, hollowed out, and terrified. "Eleanor, please, we were only thinking of your health. The place in Oak Brook, it's lovely. We can work this out." "I am not going to Oak Brook, Victoria," I say softly, taking a slow sip of my tea. "But I have heard Linden Lodge has an excellent residential program. Perhaps they have room for the three of you." Outside, the sound of a car door closing breaks the heavy stillness of the morning. I look through the window. My silver Buick LeSabre is parked in the gravel driveway, clean and sparkling under the pale autumn sun. A courier is standing on the porch steps, holding the silver Cadillac keychain Arthur gave me. I look back at my children, who are staring at me as if I were a stranger they have only just met. "The movers will be here on Wednesday morning, Victoria," I say, my voice filled with the quiet, irreversible peace of a woman who has finally finished her work. "Please make sure your things are packed. I'll be keeping the blue chair." They stand in silence, watching me as I rise from the table. I walk down the long, quiet hallway, step out onto the porch, and take the keys to my car. The house behind me is empty now, stripped of the noise of their greed. I sit in my car, turn the key, and listen to the engine hum. The road ahead of me is quiet, cold, and entirely my own.